With so much history surrounding our hatting industry, we wanted the opportunity to speak to some younger members of our community, for them to ask Joseph a few questions about his life and the industry that formed our town. We were privileged to join some students at the Queen Elizabeth Academy for a Q&A session to do just that.
Hello, my name's Evie Benton and I go to the Queen Elizabeth Academy and I'm head girl, and today I'm with my friends and we're going to be asking Joe some questions of what life was like in Aviston growing up.
How did you get involved in the hatting trade?
Well, Aviston was quite a small town when I was small, and there were two main industries in the district: hatting and coal mining. There was quite a lot of agriculture, but the farms were a separate entity in a way. So you virtually went into the hat factories or to the coal mines. And my family came from the hat, all in the hat factories. And my father was a hatter, and I followed him. My grandmother, my father's mother, she also worked in the hat factories. Three of my father's brothers and three of his sisters worked in the hat factory. Great-grandfather, he worked in the hat factories, and his sons. So as you progress to leaving school, you virtually followed into your parents. They got you a job where they worked in effect, and that's how you came to go into the trade, you see.
What were the working conditions like?
Victorian. That's the only answer that I can give you, but it's probably not a very good answer to you, because at your age you can only know Victorian from not living it, but what you read. But the hatting industry started out as a cottage industries. The people, the houses were each side of the A5, Long Street as we call it, and there weren't any of these side streets, and the yards were only just being built. And hard times, people hadn't got much money, and they didn't do much travelling, and you got to have a job to have some money to have families, because everyone seemed to have big families in those days. And so someone along the way discovered or heard about it, that wool could be converted into felt, same as flax and linen. So we had ribbon makers start making ribbons, people making linen down at Tenter Street, and we had the miners digging the coal up, because there's plenty of coal in the Hartsell Ridge and all around, and the farms, plenty of wool. And they knew, or discovered, and then progressed, that if you got wool and used boiling water and pressure, moulding it or putting pressure on, it would gradually knit together, and the fibres would interweave with each other, and you finished up with a material. It was quite thick, and then they found that by putting it under pressure, and they used to use wooden blocks and bits and hammer it, it gradually got thicker and reduced in and made the felt material, and that's how it evolved.
What were your wages like, and were things affordable?
Wages.
When you started, Derek, what were
Yes,
your wages at the beginning?
I'm trying to think because I come from the pre-decimal and now it's decimal. Let's put it like this then. 15 shillings a week. So that's 75 pence in today's money, isn't it?
A week. Yep.
A week? Yeah. And, well, a coal miner for a full week's work, he'd get 21 shillings. That's £1 and 10 pence, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
That was a coal miner's wage.
But what
And
would
hatting was less than that.
But Joe, what would you get for that money in those days?
A penny would buy you sweets. You could buy one cigarette when the men couldn't afford it. You could go into some of these small shops and they would sell they used to have Woodbines in packets of 5. It was a paper packet and 5 cigarettes in it. And some of these little local shops would sell them one cigarette because that's all they could afford. I think a packet of crisps was about 2p in old money, 2 pence. An ice cream was only a few pence. I don't know what a pair of shoes were because your parents bought those and your coat and your stocks and other stuff. But the rent was 5 shillings a week for the house.
Nice.
When we moved into Princess Road in 1947, the rent of the 3-bedroom council house, brand new built, they were the first council houses after the war, was 18 and 6p, which is just less than £1, isn't it?
Mm.
It's more than 75 pence. Obviously, I'm not very good at money. And 18 and 6p. And that included having your dustbin emptied, not on your rates.
Right.
So you can see. But although things were cheap, it was still very hard on the money that you did get. Plus the fact that the factories, particularly the hat factories, there were 7 originally in Addiston, and then 1 closed in the early 30s, and that left 6. And they used to have on the boiler, they could, like on a train, they could pull a whistle, and the hooter used to go, and that was to go to work. If you got to the factory later than the time that you were supposed to be in, that door was locked and it wasn't open for a quarter of an hour. And you went in a quarter, if it was at 8 o'clock, you was allowed, if you weren't there before 8 o'clock, that door was opened at 8:15 and you'd lost a quarter of an hour because you were paid by the hour, you see. You'd lost a quarter of an hour of your wages. Also, the piece workers who got paid by how many dozen they did a day, they'd done less dozens, so they lost money as well. And also, when the owners of the factory, because they were all private owners, they used to come round the factory, and if they saw you smoking, our boss particularly, I don't know what the others did, you'd name Smith. I didn't smoke at the time, but Smith, you put your finger up like that. When you got your wages, a shilling was stopped out of your money because everywhere was so dry with the heat and everything. It dried all the wooden workbenches,
Like a tinderbox.
fires. That was the main thing. So, but you did have break times, you see, that you could go out in the yard. But if you were caught smoking at work, that cost you a shilling. But hard times. There was a lot of patches went on your hand-me-downs from brothers to sisters, brothers and sisters to sisters, and your mother would darn your socks and put patches on your trousers, and nobody thought anything of it because everyone was in the same situation. But having said that, it was rough, but there was a camaraderie. Everyone lived with each other. It's same in the yards. If somebody ran out of, you've heard the tale, borrow a cup of sugar, or if you lost something, you could. Nobody used to lock your doors up the yards or things like that. When you went out, you hadn't got anything worth pinching in any case, if you understand what I mean. But one neighbour, if you hadn't got something, you'd have, and then you pay them back when you got your money and you got some, and everyone sort of helped each other. They had to, because we were living on top of each other, you understand what I mean? I mean, 138 people used to live up Havens Row.
Crikey.
One row of houses, well, there were two rows of houses each side.
Joe? How many houses were that?
I can't remember, it is in the Addiston books.
About 5 or 6, I think.
Oh no, there was more than that.
There
It went
were
through
some
from,
yards that only had 5 or 6,
oh yes,
and there was literally...
yes, tiny. There was up our yard, the White Line yard, when we eventually went there was 5 houses in the row, and then 2 at the front where it was on the front street. 1 toilet. Anyway, that's not the section that we're on. That answers your question, sweetheart. Money was tight. Pop bottles and jam jars and rabbit skins, you could take those to the local, what did they used to call Mr. Hopley? Scrap iron, it was like the scrap iron yards of today. There was a name that we used to call them. And you could sell rabbit skins, jam jars, because they were reusable, you see, and the pop bottles. If you took your pop bottles back to a pub, you got, say, a penny or penny or halfpenny. Rabbit skins, they were used for making artificial fur gloves, and up in Manchester, the hats were made out of fur, not wool, and the rabbit fur was used for that. So these gentlemen who ran these scrap yards, they sold them onto the firms, if you understand what I mean. Oh, that was great. If you could find a jam jar, you got halfpenny straight into the sweet shop, and you could have a lolly or something like that. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Oh gosh,
but,
did you have to give all your wages straight to your parents, or did you?
I didn't have to. You did automatically.
Oh,
that was something that you did when you left school. You automatically, your parents had your family, and they gave you pocket money.
Oh, that's okay.
So, as I say, that was automatic.
Yeah.
So, but then later on, when you got older, if you finished apprenticeship, people who apprenticed, and when you did get older, your mother or dad would probably say to you about it, and they'd say, oh, give us so-and-so, and the rest's yours. But that usually used to come in about 18-ish, when you were about 18.
Were there any accidents in the workplace, and did they look after you?
Many, of various kinds, because everything was run off old shafts and belt systems, off a great big motor, and that drove a big shaft, then the pulley wheels went off that, and they interspersed and went round the factories. You've probably seen them when these old documentaries with showing the wool mills and stuff like that, and all these belts flopping about, and you had a belt on the no electric motors, and the machines had a wheel on the side and a flywheel, and these belts would be about 4.5 inches wide and stuff like that, quite thick, and they went onto the shaft, and there was a flywheel on the shaft, a drive wheel on the shaft, and that was churning away, and on the side of your machine you had a handle which would either go left or right, whichever side it was on your machine. When you wanted your machine to start, the big machines, the bumping machines and the forming machines and all this kind of business, you get the handle, and the belt was in a cradle. It came across, and as you pulled it, the flywheel that was whizzing round at the bottom doing nothing with the drive, it would gradually go on to the drive wheel that was on the axle of your machine, at the side of the machine. And as it went on, once it engaged, when that went round, the machine started going. Of course, those days, you hadn't got all this health and safety and things like that. People, say in the winter, they've got cardigans on or an old jacket and that kind of business. Get the sleeve caught in the wheel, and Bert Taylor at Wilson's in the 30s, before I started. I used to go up there playing before I started work, but that's beside the point. Bert got in, it took him up to the top wheel, and his arm was underneath, got his sleeves caught, and he went in between the belt and the wheel at the top, and of course the machine kept going, and he lost his left arm, and he didn't break his arm, he pulled his arm out at the socket. And there was countless accidents, not so major as that. Bert's was one of the worst. Another chap, he had his hand in a machine that went up and down, and that slipped, and he lost those three. He'd only got his thumb and little finger, Wilf Bartlum. And a lady, she was leaning over the work on the job that she was doing, and her hair, because she didn't have these nets and stuff like that that you see in places now, and her hair got caught in it, and it dragged her up, and she had to have an operation. She was off work for quite a while.
Would you get paid for, would work continue to pay you if you were off?
I haven't got to that yet, do you? and this lady, this is on the factory that I work. Other factories had bits and bobs, minor accidents and things like that, using acid and hatter, when mad as a hatter. That came from us using mercury. But anyway, this lady, it pulled her and it disfigured her for all her life. She always wore a hat after that because it did take so much of a scalp out. And it pulled all the skin of her nose off and it disfigured her. Lovely lady. But what used to happen, mainly, they ensured that person, it was cheaper market than today's, you was found a job. You had a job with them. Bert did for a start. He did leave. That was his choice. Will stopped there till he retired. That was well after the war. But you didn't have one of the jobs that paid the highest wages, these menial jobs then, because companies, and I think they still do, have to employ what they call green card workers. That's something to do with their insurances, I think. And there's an obligation on them, pro rata to their workforce, so many green card workers. Well, anybody like that was a green card worker immediately. My father finished up as a green card worker, although he was the senior foreman, because he was in the war and he got blowed up. And he was in hospital for 7 months. He went back to the hat factory and he got a job, and he was running the factory for the last so many years, senior chap. But, crafty move, they weren't losing any money to put my dad down as one of the green card workers to fill their quota. They weren't having to pay a good high earner. My dad was getting his wage in any case, and that's what used to happen. So the most people did have a job at the factory because we hadn't. I don't know when these laws came in that you started getting, because unions started coming in and stuff like that, and you get compensation and that now. But burns with acid and scalds and things like that. There was loads of that. Because everything was open, you know what I mean? You didn't take any notice of it.
What qualifications did you need to get the job, and were you ever promoted?
Well, you didn't need any qualifications at all, none whatsoever. I mean, you didn't even have, some people couldn't read and write. Some could a bit. I mean, this is the very start of when I first went. But there was very few jobs that you had where you had to, you know, office workers were a separate entity. They came from another class of people, if you understand what I mean. The people who went to doing the office work, clerks and that kind of business, they'd had a bit more education, came from better families. Weren't many of them lived up the yards in those slum houses, but that's beside the point. They weren't posh. But so it didn't really matter. But you see, your parents or your grandparents and great-grandparents in a lot of instances of my generation, they knew them. And a lot of they started building these yards, you see, the Vero's Terrace, Vero's Yard. And they owned these one up and one down sort of thing that we lived in. So you were their employees. And when your father or your mother, the mother used to ask for the daughters for the trimming room and that kind of thing. Fathers used to ask for the sons. When any jobs going for, they asked the foreman originally, that kind of thing. Then he'd probably go to the senior foreman, then he'd to go into the boss. And sometimes the boss would come talking to the people because they knew them, all lived in their houses and that. Oh, you've got a son coming up leaving school, Charlie, or whatever. Yes, Mr. John. Anywhere idea where he's going? He's coming with us. And so virtually that was your qualification. As long as they knew you were honest and hard work, that was the thing they wanted. Honesty and not work shy. And then, of course, if you were good and became a top person and took a real interest, you could then perhaps become a foreman or something like when a foreman passed away or that. You could get higher, you see, or you could go on to better jobs. The best work got the best pay.
How did you celebrate events like Christmas, and was it a social gathering?
Oh yes, we had there was quite a social, with everyone knowing everyone and the families. We used to have what you call garnishes. That was clear a table, put a cloth on it, and the ladies would bring some sandwiches in and tarts, minced tarts, all home cooked and stuff like that. At Christmas in particular, you always have a garnish at Christmas. And the day that you were breaking up, you'd finish work at the dinner time, because you had an hour dinner time. And the afternoon was sometimes given over to just straightening, cleaning up and stuff like that. But the ladies would bring some stuff in and they'd set the work table out, and they'd be mashing tea, and perhaps occasionally you might have a bottle of wine brought in, but it's very rare. In the later years, as we were getting older, you did get a few more bottles of wine come in, but it was mostly mashing, having a cup of tea with it. And they'd bring trifles and stuff like that. And so that was definitely for Christmas. You perhaps get a Christmas, certain people, if you'd worked well, you get a Christmas present from the boss. And our boss at Wilson and Stafford's, who lived in the big house opposite the golf course, he had a deal with a gentleman called Mr. Collins, who had a store opposite the library. It was opposite the library now, Mr. Collins, and he sold everything, even vegetables, but all household stuff. And he used to watch, and the families that he got to know, Mr. William, he'd ask around, and he knew the people who got the most children and were the worst off, and what kind of wages they were on. And every year he used to send a list to Mr. Collins, and he used to make a box up of Christmas food, of food. Nothing fancy, because he knew that they didn't want that. General food to tide them over. And I don't know how many he used to do, but he got a set amount. But the people who were up against it, and most of the other owners was of a similar nature. One way or other, they'd give you a little bit extra at them times. Also, we used to celebrate St Clement's Day, which is the 23rd of November, and that is the patron saint of sailors and hatters. And you used to have half a day off. But that stopped. The war finished that off. It did start again after, but you had a garnish then. And also, they used to have a day trip. There used to be a firm called Evans's with coaches. It was at Manchester. It was a local family, the Evans brothers, and they got coaches opposite the Blue Border garage was, and the factories all used to do it, not on the same day, and they'd book them up, and it'd be announced in the factory, and notice boards would go up, and that a day trip to Skegness, a day trip to Rhyl, also on such and such a day. It was always on a Saturday, and anyone who wanted to go, everyone was invited. Well, it wasn't convenient, I don't suppose, for everybody, but you went. And the buses that where the bus station is now, in that street, the coaches, before the knocked houses down, coaches would line up in the street, and you'd go down there with whatever you wanted, as you took your costumes and that, and you get on the coaches, and it was all worked out. It was on, in the office, they worked out the staff and get them all on all the buses, and off the coaches would go, and you go to the seaside for the day.
But interestingly, Joe, as well, the traditions of the Veros actually carried on the tradition of St Clement's, didn't they? And what they would do is they would annually host a lunch for all the former workers that were involved, and they would actually invite you along, didn't they, for an annual lunch, so that you could all be together again and reminisce about the times. And that actually happened up till COVID.
And obviously we couldn't have the get-togethers, and it was stopped. One thing I'm going to tell all of you now that I think is very important. Sometime after in your careers, if you get jobs or positions or start businesses, always make sure that you've got an insurance. Because when you come to the age where you finish work and your wages finish or whatever, you cannot live or have things that you would like on what the state gives. I'm not saying the state should do more. Nanny state, we can't have that. The money's got to come from somewhere. But by
Always
all
prepare
means,
for
try and ensure that
good pension.
You're going to have a pension, either private pensions or your firm's pensions, because when you're getting up to our ages and that kind of business, what will things cost? But I do advise you, always make sure. A lot of people say, like I did and stuff like that, I got a job for life, we thought. I didn't bother doing any more education. Education, I always say, although I'm an ignorant person myself, when you're educated, you've got it. If you go somewhere and you need the education, you haven't got time to get it. So even if you're bored and fed up of going to school and things like that, absorb as much as you can, because what you know, they can't take off you. And it may come up somewhere in your careers, because you've got, life's a very funny place. And you've got to make sure that you've got something to fall back on. Don't be discouraged about life. I'm not a moaning old what's it, but life's what you make it, I'll tell you.